I am Julian, 34 years old. Last year, my parents kicked me out of the very house I was paying to keep afloat. While I was drowning in their bills, desperately trying to save our family home from ruin, my own father looked me dead in the eye and said, "Take the guest room or move out." They humiliated me, laughing right in my face in front of my deadbeat brother and his gold-digger wife. But there is one thing they did not know. I had already secured my own assets with my lawyer, and the massive real estate fraud they were blindly tangled in was about to detonate. And right now, they are the ones begging me for mercy. Before I tell you exactly what happened, hit that like button if you believe that karma always comes to collect. And do not forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Now, let us go back to the moment my entire world shattered. It was a Sunday evening in late October, the kind of crisp, quiet evening that usually makes you appreciate the end of a grueling week. The dining room table was set with my mother's favorite floral china, the good plates she only brought out when she wanted to impress someone. The scent of a roasted chicken filled the air, mingling with the smell of lemon polish my mother had aggressively rubbed into the hardwood floors. To an outsider looking through the front window, we looked like the picture-perfect American family having our weekly dinner. But the tension in that room was suffocating. I sat in my usual chair, staring at my plate, my appetite completely gone. My stomach felt like a lead weight. Across from me sat my older brother, Cameron, and his new wife, Victoria. They had just arrived unannounced, dragging their heavy designer luggage through the front door and piling it high in the hallway. I had spent the last 5 years working grueling 60-hour weeks as a structural engineer. Every spare dollar of my salary went into this house. I paid the property taxes. I paid Toby, our local contractor, to fix the rotting roof before the winter snow could cave it in. I covered the soaring electricity bills, the water, the endless repairs that an old house demands. I was the financial backbone of this family. I had put my own life on hold, sacrificed my dreams, and drained my accounts just to keep them afloat. Yet, when my father, Richard, leaned forward over his untouched plate, his voice was as cold as ice. He did not look at me with gratitude. He did not look at me like a son who had saved him from bankruptcy. He looked at me like I was a nuisance, an obstacle in his way. "You can take the guest room or move out," he said. My fork hit the porcelain plate with a sharp clink. The sound echoed in the dead silence of the dining room. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline of a terrible joke. I waited for him to crack a smile, to tell me he was kidding. There was no smile. His jaw was set, his eyes hard and unyielding. My brother, Cameron, jumped in immediately. His tone was dripping with absolute glee, a smug smirk plastered across his face. "Better if you are gone by tomorrow, Julian. We need the space. We are starting fresh here." I looked at my mother, Sylvia. She was aggressively cutting a piece of roasted carrot, her hands trembling slightly, refusing to make eye contact with me. She chose silence. She always chose silence when it came to Cameron getting exactly what he wanted. Beside Cameron, Victoria adjusted her shiny diamond watch, the metal catching the light of the chandelier. She offered a tight, patronizing smile, her eyes gleaming like she had just won a lottery. She looked at me like I was dirt beneath her expensive designer boots. Rage, pure and blinding, flared in my chest. I had sacrificed my own savings, my chance at building a solid 401k, my dreams of starting a college fund for my own future children, just to make sure my parents did not lose this house. And now I was being treated like a disposable tenant who had missed rent. I stood up, the legs of my wooden chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. The sound made my mother flinch, but she still did not look up. I grabbed my car keys off the table, my knuckles turning white from how hard I gripped the metal. "Fine," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "I am gone." That same night, I packed every single thing I owned. I did not just take my clothes and my toothbrush. I took the massive flat-screen TV I bought for the living room. I took the brand-new coffee maker from the kitchen counter. I hauled the expensive mattress I had purchased for myself straight out the front door, dragging it down the driveway in the dark. I walked away from the place I had kept standing for half a decade. I drove away without looking back, leaving them to their delusions. Exactly 1 week later, I was sitting in my new, quiet apartment in downtown Omaha when my phone buzzed on the coffee table. The caller ID showed my mother's name. I stared at it for a long time. I almost did not answer. When I finally hit the green button and brought the phone to my ear, I did not hear my mother's usual passive-aggressive tone. I heard pure, unadulterated chaos. Sylvia was sobbing hysterically, gasping for air between wails. In the background, Cameron was screaming at the top of his lungs, his voice cracking with sheer panic and terror. "She is lying. Mom, tell me she is lying. Call her right now," Cameron shrieked. I could hear the heavy boots of strangers walking on the hardwood floors of my childhood home. I heard a stern, unfamiliar voice demanding documentation and mentioning a federal warrant. The illusion of their perfect life had shattered into a million pieces. The nightmare I had warned them about, the catastrophe they had mocked me for predicting, had finally arrived at their doorstep. But how did my family become so utterly blind? How did they let a complete stranger walk into our home, dismantle my life, and drag them all to the brink of a massive federal lawsuit? To understand the sheer magnitude of this betrayal, I have to take you back to the years of silent suffering that led up to that fateful dinner. I moved back into my parents' house a few years ago. It was supposed to be a temporary arrangement. My grandmother had passed away after a long illness, and the inheritance she left behind was barely enough to cover her own funeral costs. My parents were drowning in debt. The mortgage was 3 months past due. The utility companies were sending final shut-off notices, and the house itself was crumbling. The foundation needed major work. The plumbing was ancient and leaking into the basement, and my father, Richard, stubbornly ignored all of it. He acted as if ignoring the bills would magically make them disappear. I am a structural engineer. I solve complex problems for a living. I look at broken things and figure out how to reinforce them. So, I took it upon myself to solve my family's financial disaster. I handed over a massive chunk of my salary every single month. I hired contractors to fix the structural damage. I paid for the new water heater when they were forced to take freezing cold showers in the middle of December. I covered the property taxes so the city would not put a lien on the house. I was working from dawn until dusk, running from dusty construction sites to late-night office meetings, pouring my lifeblood into keeping a roof over my parents' heads. I sacrificed my social life, my dating life, and my own financial security. But no matter how much money I drained from my own bank account, no matter how many times I saved them from disaster, it was never enough to earn my father's respect. Richard's focus was always fixed entirely on my older brother, Cameron. In our family, Cameron was the golden child. He had a natural charisma, a smooth way of talking that could sell ice to a polar bear. The problem was, Cameron had an incredible knack for failing upward. He burned through one ridiculous business idea after another. First, it was a high-end food truck that ended in a massive health code violation and thousands of dollars in fines. Then, it was some shady cryptocurrency app that swallowed up his investors' money and nearly got him sued. He even tried starting an online retail store that folded within 3 months, leaving him buried in inventory debt. Every single time Cameron failed, he would come crawling back to our father with a brand new pitch. And Richard would eat it up. My dad would praise Cameron's vision, calling him an entrepreneur, a risk-taker, a visionary. Meanwhile, I was just the reliable ATM in the hallway. I would hand my father the receipt for a $2,000 plumbing repair, and he would just nod absent-mindedly, already asking if I could lend Cameron a few bucks for a business trip. The worst blow came during a Thanksgiving dinner 2 years ago. I was standing near the hallway, holding a tray of appetizers, about to enter the kitchen to help with the dishes. The door was slightly ajar. I heard my mother, Sylvia, whispering to my father in hushed, urgent tones. "Do not push Julian too hard about the grocery bill," she hissed. "He is just here to help pay the mortgage, Richard. Cameron is the one with the real vision. We have to support Cameron's dreams. Julian is fine where he is." I stood frozen in the hallway. The words hit me like a physical punch to the gut. I was not their son. I was their retirement plan. I was the safety net they used so they could afford to blindly finance my brother's delusions. It stung terribly, a deep, aching pain in my chest, but my fear of completely losing my family kept me tethered to that house. I swallowed my pride. I walked into the kitchen, smiled, and kept writing the checks. And then Cameron met Victoria. He brought her to dinner one evening in late autumn. I remember looking out the living room window and watching a sleek, brand-new black Porsche Cayenne pull into our cracked concrete driveway. Out stepped Victoria. She was wearing a tailored designer suit, sharp heels, and carried a leather handbag that cost more than my car. Cameron was beaming, puffing his chest out like he had just conquered the world. He introduced her as a high-power real estate agent. From the moment she walked through the door, my parents were completely mesmerized. Sylvia could not stop gushing over Victoria's polished appearance, complimenting her hair, her clothes, her jewelry. Richard practically drooled over her stories of flipping commercial properties and negotiating massive land deals across the state. But my analytical brain immediately started seeing the red flags. I know the Omaha real estate market. It is stable, but it is not the kind of market where a 30-year-old agent drives a $100,000 car and flaunts a Rolex, unless she is the top 1% of the entire state. Victoria laughed entirely too loud at my father's dry jokes. She tossed her hair and dropped buzzwords constantly. She talked about leverage, equity extraction, and aggressive portfolio expansion. It sounded like she was reading a script from a late-night infomercial meant to scam desperate investors. I tried to ask her specific questions. I asked about zoning laws on her latest commercial project. I asked about the current interest rates affecting her residential buyers. She deflected every single question smoothly, changing the subject with a loud laugh, steering the conversation back to some vague, multi-million-dollar deal she was supposedly closing next week. As the weeks turned into months, her lifestyle became even more absurd. She would drop by the house with expensive shopping bags, handing my mother high-end perfumes and buying my father imported scotch. Cameron did not question a single thing. He just bragged constantly about his wife's incredible hustle. I watched the math, and the math simply was not matching. I was stretching my substantial salary to the absolute breaking point just to pay for my parents' basic needs. Yet Victoria was throwing cash around like it was printed in her basement. I tried to bring it up to my mother one afternoon while she was knitting in the living room. "Mom," I said gently, sitting across from her, "does Victoria's income seem a little exaggerated to you? I mean, buying a new Porsche and taking Cameron to Aspen every other weekend, it does not align with local real estate commissions. Something is wrong." Sylvia did not even look up from her yarn. She just sighed, a sound of deep, profound annoyance. "Julian, please do not be so terribly skeptical. She is highly successful. You should be happy for your brother instead of counting her money. Maybe if you took some risks like Cameron, you would not be so stressed all the time." I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. It was not just the money that bothered me. It was the way Victoria looked at me when Richard and Sylvia turned their backs. It was a cold, calculating smirk. She knew exactly what she was doing. She was wrapping my parents around her perfectly manicured finger, feeding them a fantasy of immense wealth. I started keeping a detailed mental ledger of every single dollar I spent on that property. Over the years, it amounted to nearly $150,000. I was not just helping out. I was the only reason they had not faced foreclosure. I spent my weekends fixing leaky pipes while Cameron and Victoria posted photos from luxury ski resorts. The resentment built up inside me like magma under a volcano. I lay awake at night in my childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling, wondering when my breaking point would arrive. I knew Victoria was playing a dangerous game. I could feel it in my bones. But I had no idea just how deep her rot went, or that she had already set her sights on the very house I was bleeding myself dry to protect. The explosion finally happened on that quiet Sunday evening. I had just finished a brutal 70-hour week reviewing blueprints for a massive commercial bridge project. My promotion depended on this project, and my brain was completely fried. My back ached, My eyes burned from staring at screens, and all I wanted was a hot meal and a good night's sleep in the house I paid for. I walked into the dining room, exhausted to my core. The table was set. My mother was fussing with the napkins. My father was carving the roast chicken. Then, the heavy oak front door slammed open, rattling the picture frames on the hallway wall. Cameron burst into the house. He was dragging 2 massive designer suitcases, his face flushed with excitement. Victoria trailed right behind him, carrying a Gucci tote, the heels of her expensive boots clicking sharply against the hardwood floor like a metronome counting down to a disaster. "We are moving in," Cameron announced loudly, dropping the heavy bags onto the floor with a massive thud that shook the floorboards. Victoria flashed that tight, plastic smile of hers. Her eyes immediately began scanning the living room, calculating, assessing the space like she was getting ready to gut the place and flip it. My stomach twisted into a tight, painful knot. This was not a weekend visit. This was an invasion. I looked at my father, expecting him to ask them what was going on, to demand an explanation. Instead, Richard calmly wiped his hands on a napkin, did not even blink, and looked straight at me. "Julian," my father said, his voice completely flat, devoid of any warmth or paternal affection. "You can take the guest room or move out." I froze. My fork hovered in mid-air. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. "What?" I managed to choke out. My throat felt like it was closing up, filled with sand. Cameron smirked, pulling out a dining chair and leaning back arrogantly, crossing his arms over his chest. "Come on, Julian. You do not need all that space in the master bedroom. Victoria and I need an office for her real estate work. We are starting fresh here. It is better if you just clear out." I felt a blinding heat rise in my chest, traveling up my neck and into my face. The years of financial abuse, the total lack of gratitude, the blatant disrespect, it all boiled over in a fraction of a second. The dam finally broke. "Hold on a damn minute," I said, my voice rising, sharp and echoing in the dining room. "I have been paying for this house. I pay the electricity. I pay the repairs. I pay the property taxes. I bought the refrigerator you are putting your imported water into. I paid the contractor to fix the roof over your heads. And now you want me to pack up and sleep on a fold-out couch so your deadbeat son and his wife can have my room." I turned to my father, desperate for a shred of logic, a single ounce of defense from the man who was supposed to protect me. Richard slammed his hand down on the table. The water glasses rattled dangerously. "Enough!" he barked, his face turning purple with rage. "This is not about your little bills, Julian. It is time for you to step back. Cameron and Victoria need the room more. They have massive business plans. They are building a real future for this family." Plans. The word echoed in my head, mocking me. Cameron's plans never lasted longer than a single financial quarter. I was the one keeping them all from living on the streets in cardboard boxes. Cameron leaned forward, his grin widening into something deeply malicious and cruel. "You are not exactly essential here, Julian," he mocked, enjoying every second of my pain. "You are just here, a placeholder until I got my life together." Victoria actually stifled a laugh, covering her mouth with her manicured hand, her eyes dancing with amusement. I clenched my fists under the table. My nails dug so hard into my palms they almost broke the skin, drawing tiny crescents of blood. "Not essential?" I shot back, my voice vibrating with a fury I did not know I possessed. "I have sacrificed my savings, my promotions, and my peace of mind to keep this family from bankruptcy. What have you ever done, Cameron, except drain every dime this family has ever had?" "That is enough," my father roared, standing up from his chair. "They are family and they are staying. End of discussion. You take the guest room or you leave my house." I looked at my mother. Sylvia was staring down at her lap, twisting her cloth napkin into a tight knot, her knuckles white. She refused to meet my eyes. She was letting this happen. She was trading me for the illusion of wealth. The room suddenly felt incredibly small. The walls were closing in on me. I realized in that exact moment that I would never be enough for them. I would only ever be a wallet, a tool to be used and discarded when something shinier came along. I am not doing this, I said. I stood up. The screech of my chair was loud and final. If I am not wanted here, if I am just a placeholder, then I am gone. I stormed upstairs to my bedroom. My heart was pounding frantically against my ribs. I pulled a large duffel bag from the closet and started throwing my clothes into it. I packed my laptop, my engineering hard drives, my crucial documents. Then, I walked back downstairs. I did not just leave quietly. I refused to leave them with the comforts I had paid for. I walked straight into the living room, reached behind the entertainment center, and unplugged the massive 70-inch flat-screen TV I had paid $2,000 for last Thanksgiving. I tucked it under my arm. I walked into the kitchen, grabbed the high-end espresso machine I bought for myself, and hauled it all to the front door. I went back upstairs, grabbed the expensive orthopedic mattress off the bed, and dragged it down the stairs. Cameron stood in the hallway, his arms crossed, laughing out loud. "You are taking the TV? Seriously? You are acting like a child, Julian. Good riddance." I completely ignored him. I made 3 trips to my car, throwing everything that legally belonged to me into the trunk and the back seat. Mrs. Henderson, our elderly neighbor, was standing on her front porch across the street, watching the entire spectacle with wide eyes, pulling her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. Richard stood in the doorway, his face red with anger. "You are making a massive scene, Julian. You are embarrassing this family in front of the whole neighborhood." I did not give him an answer. I slammed the trunk of my car shut, got into the driver's seat, and started the engine. As I pulled out of the driveway, I looked in the rearview mirror. The house, the place I had poured my blood and sweat into, shrank away into the distance. I spent the next 3 days moving into a small, quiet apartment in downtown Omaha. It was a stark contrast to the stifling toxicity of my parents' home. No yelling, no demands for money, just peace. But the peace did not last long. My analytical mind could not let go of the puzzle. Why did Cameron and Victoria suddenly need to move into my parents' rundown house if Victoria was supposedly a millionaire real estate mogul? People with millions do not move into a cramped suburban house with their in-laws. I decided to do some digging. I pulled up the public business registry for the state of Nebraska on my laptop. I searched for the new business Cameron had been bragging about. It was registered under an LLC. But when I dug into the corporate filings, looking at the registered agents and the financial backers, my blood ran completely cold. Cameron was listed as the CEO. But the sole financial contributor, the entity funneling hundreds of thousands of dollars into his supposed consulting firm, was a holding company registered entirely to Victoria. Cameron was not starting a business. He was operating a shell company. He was acting as a blind mule, washing dirty money from Victoria's real estate transactions. My idiot brother was the fall guy for a massive financial crime, and he had just dragged my parents right into the middle of the blast radius. The reality of the situation hit me like a freight train. Victoria was not a genius investor. She was a criminal, a parasite, and my family was deeply infected by her poison. They had invited a viper into their nest, and it was getting ready to strike. I went into the office the next morning looking like I had not slept in a week, because I hadn't. My eyes were bloodshot, my shirt was wrinkled, and my hands were shaking from too much caffeine and too much adrenaline. Naomi, a senior project manager and a close mentor of mine, noticed immediately. She marched into my cubicle, handed me a black coffee, and shut the door behind her, locking out the noise of the engineering floor. "You look like you are carrying a building on your shoulders, Julian. Speak," she demanded, crossing her arms. I poured out the entire story. The eviction, the money I had spent, the shell LLC I found the night before. Naomi, who was a fiercely protective woman in her late 50s and had survived a brutal divorce herself, did not offer me empty sympathy. She offered sharp, actionable strategy. "You need to legally protect yourself yesterday. she said sharply, pointing a finger at me. You paid for renovations on that house. You have a massive paper trail. If the feds come knocking on Victoria's door, they will seize every asset tied to her and your brother. You need a lawyer to separate your money from their mess before you get dragged down with them. She was entirely right. I pulled out my phone and called Harrison. Harrison and I went to college together. He was now one of the most ruthless real estate attorneys in the city. I asked him to meet me for lunch and brought thick files of printed copies of the LLC filings, my bank statements, and the receipts for every repair I had done on the house. Sitting in a quiet booth at a downtown diner, Harrison reviewed the paperwork. His face grew incredibly grim. He pushed his glasses up his nose and sighed heavily. Julian, this is bad. Really bad, Harrison muttered, tapping his expensive pen against the documents. I ran Victoria's name through my network this morning after you called. She has a history, a very dark one. She used to work for a brokerage in Lincoln that got shut down by the state board for forging client signatures and skimming escrow funds. She managed to slither out of the indictment by throwing her boss under the bus and cooperating with the authorities. But she never stopped grifting. Harrison paused, looking me dead in the eye, his expression dead serious. I also spoke to your Aunt Beatrice. She knows about this. Beatrice knows what? I asked, my grip tightening on my coffee mug until my knuckles turned white. Beatrice used the same title company Victoria works with a few years ago, Harrison explained. She saw Victoria falsifying an appraisal document 6 months ago to inflate a property value. Beatrice confronted her, and Victoria threatened to ruin Beatrice's husband's pension fund by filing a fraudulent lawsuit against his small business if she spoke up. Your aunt is terrified of this woman. She has been hiding in silence. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. Victoria was a predator, a calculated, vicious predator, and she had her teeth firmly lodged into my parents' necks. I needed to know exactly how deep the financial rot went. There was only one person who handled my parents' accounts. Marcus, a local branch manager at their bank who had known our family for 20 years. He had set up their retirement funds, their checking accounts, everything. I drove straight to the bank. I did not ask the receptionist for an appointment. I walked right past her, marched into Marcus's glass-walled office, and shut the door behind me, locking it. Marcus looked up, startled, dropping his pen. Julian? What on earth? What can I do for you? Cut the crap, Marcus, I said, leaning over his desk, keeping my voice low and dangerous. I know Victoria is funneling money through Cameron's LLC, and I know my parents' accounts are linked to that business. Show me the exposure, right now. Marcus went pale. He started sweating. He tried to stammer out a weak defense about client confidentiality and bank policy, but I slammed my hand down on his mahogany desk, rattling his family photos. I have been depositing my own paycheck into their mortgage account for 5 years, Marcus. My name is on the secondary payee list. I have legal right to view the ledger. Show me the numbers, or I am calling the State Banking Commission right now and telling them you are willfully facilitating money laundering for a known fraudster. Marcus trembled. He knew I was not bluffing. With shaking hands, he typed his password and turned his computer monitor toward me. I looked at the screen, and my heart completely stopped beating. The air left my lungs. The retirement savings account, nearly $200,000 my father had worked 40 grueling years to save, the money meant to support them in their old age, was completely drained. The balance was zero. A flat, devastating zero. But that was not the worst part. There was a massive red flag on the property title of the house. A second mortgage? I whispered, tracing the terrifying numbers on the screen. $250,000? What the hell is this, Marcus? Victoria brought Richard in last month, Marcus admitted, his voice shaking, staring at his lap. She told him it was a bridge loan for a massive commercial property deal. She promised him a guaranteed 40% return within 6 months. She had Cameron co-sign the documents to make it look legitimate. She used an aggressive private equity firm, a shadow lender. The interest rate is predatory, Julian. If they miss 2 payments, the lender takes the house. Instantly. The inheritance, the equity, the entire foundation of my parents' lives. Completely gone. Evaporated into thin air. Victoria had convinced my arrogant, foolish father and my stupid brother to hand over the deed to the house, and they had forged my mother's signature to rush the paperwork through before anyone could ask questions. I walked out of the bank feeling a strange mix of profound, soul-crushing grief and absolute, razor-sharp clarity. I drove straight to my parents' house. I did not bother knocking. I used the spare key I still had on my keychain and walked right into the living room. Richard, Cameron, and Victoria were sitting on the expensive leather couches, drinking expensive red wine and laughing at something on the television. They stopped laughing the second they saw me. "I told you to leave your key on the counter when you got kicked out," Cameron sneered, standing up. I ignored him. I pulled the printed ledger I had forced Marcus to print from my jacket pocket and threw it onto the coffee table. It landed right next to Victoria's crystal wine glass. "You mortgaged the house to a shadow lender, Dad?" I asked, my voice deadly quiet, echoing in the large room. "You drained the 401k? You gave every last cent you had to her." Richard's face flushed red with instant, defensive anger. He stood up, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Do not come into my house and question my financial decisions. You know nothing about wealth. It is an investment. Victoria is securing our future, while you just whine about utility bills. She is stealing your future," I yelled, finally losing my composure, my voice cracking. "She is using Cameron as a dummy CEO to wash illegal funds. When the federal investigators come, and they will come, Cameron is going to federal prison, and you are going to be living on the street. Aunt Beatrice knows. My lawyer Harrison knows. I have the proof right here in my hand." Cameron stormed forward and shoved me hard in the chest. "You are just jealous, Julian. You are a miserable, jealous loser who cannot stand that I am finally rich and successful. Get the hell out of our house before I call the cops." I looked at Victoria. She was sipping her wine, perfectly calm, offering me that same cold, calculated smirk. She did not look worried at all. She knew I could not stop the avalanche. It was already in motion, and she had her exit strategy planned. I looked at my father. He was glaring at me with absolute contempt, choosing his golden child over the truth one final time. "Leave, Julian," Richard spat, turning his back on me. "And do not ever come back." I took a deep breath. The last thread of obligation I felt toward these people snapped, clean and permanent. "All right," I said quietly. "I tried to save you. Remember that. I tried." I turned around and walked out the door, the sound of their mocking laughter following me out. I got into my car, picked up my phone, and dialed Harrison's number. "Harrison," I said, staring at the front door of my childhood home, feeling the heavy burden lift off my shoulders. "Call Captain Lawson at the Federal Fraud Division. Give him everything we have. We are blowing this wide open." I thought the worst was over. I was so incredibly wrong. The real storm was just about to make landfall. I sat alone in the quiet sanctuary of my new apartment, the phone pressed hard against my ear. Through the speaker, Cameron's hysterical, high-pitched screams echoed, cutting through the calm of my evening. My mother was wailing in the background, a raw, terrifying sound of absolute panic that I had never heard from her before in my entire 34 years of life. The nightmare I had warned them about, the catastrophe they had mocked me for predicting, had finally arrived at their doorstep. I did not rush. I did not panic. My heart did not race. I took a slow, deep breath, feeling a strange, profound sense of calm wash over my entire body. I calmly put on my dark winter jacket, grabbed my car keys off the kitchen counter, and walked out the door. The drive across town to the house I had bled myself dry to save felt incredibly long, yet surreal. When I turned onto my parents' street, the entire neighborhood was lit up like a Christmas tree. Flashing red and blue lights painted the suburban houses in harsh colors. 3 federal cruisers and 2 unmarked black SUVs were parked haphazardly on the front lawn and in the driveway, crushing the flower beds my mother used to tend to. The local HOA president, Mrs. Henderson, and several other neighbors were standing on their porches, clutching their robes, whispering furiously and pointing at my childhood home. This was the ultimate humiliation for a family that prided itself on appearances. I parked my car a few houses down, right next to a fire hydrant, and walked toward the absolute chaos unfolding on the lawn. The heavy oak front door was wide open, practically ripped off its hinges. I stepped inside, and the living room looked like a Category 5 hurricane had ripped right through the center of it. Drawers were pulled completely out of the antique mahogany desks. File cabinets were emptied onto the expensive Persian rug, and federal agents wearing dark windbreakers were aggressively bagging documents. Captain Lawson, a tall, imposing man from the Federal Fraud Division whom I had met with just days prior, was standing in the center of the room with a heavy metal clipboard, barking orders to his team. Cameron was on his knees near the leather sofa. The smug, arrogant golden child who had told me I was useless just a week ago, the brother who had laughed as I carried my mattress out the door, was now a weeping, hyperventilating mess. He was clawing at his own hair, his face red and blotchy, begging the agents to listen to him. I did not know. I swear to God I did not know anything about this, Cameron shrieked, tears streaming down his face, dripping onto his expensive designer shirt. She told me it was a legitimate real estate consulting firm. She told me I was the CEO because I had the vision. I just signed the papers. I just signed where she told me to sign. You have to believe me, please. Captain Lawson looked down at Cameron with a mixture of absolute disgust and professional indifference. You are listed as the primary beneficiary on a shell corporation that laundered over $3 million in fraudulent mortgage loans. Son, you moved money across state lines. Ignorance is not a legal defense in a federal lawsuit. You signed the documents with your own hand. Your name is on the wire transfers. You are going to need a very good lawyer, and even that probably won't save you. My father, Richard, was completely silent. The arrogant patriarch who had demanded I sleep on a fold-out couch, who had chosen this fake empire over his own flesh and blood, was sitting in his armchair. His face was entirely gray, devoid of any blood or life. He looked like he had aged 20 years in 20 minutes. He was clutching a piece of paper in his shaking hands, the official federal notice of asset seizure. The reality that his entire life's work, his reputation, and his home were gone was finally crushing him. My mother, Sylvia, was pacing the hardwood floor, her hands clasped together in a desperate, frantic prayer. When she saw me walk through the front door, her eyes widened as if I were a savior descending from the sky. She ran toward me, grabbing my arms, her fingernails digging deep into the fabric of my jacket. Julian, you are here? Thank God you have to do something, she cried, her voice ragged and breathless. They are taking everything. They say Victoria forged documents. They say the house is collateral for a criminal enterprise. Tell them there is a mistake. You know about buildings, you know about contracts, you are an engineer, you have to fix this. Talk to that man with the badge. I looked down at her hands gripping my arms. I did not feel a shred of the obligation that used to chain me to her. I gently but firmly removed her hands from my jacket. I looked at her, then at my broken father, and finally at my pathetic, weeping brother on the floor. Where is Victoria? I asked, my voice completely devoid of emotion, cutting through the noise of the room like a cold blade. Cameron looked up, his eyes bloodshot and wild with betrayal. She went out the back door when the police pulled up. She told me she was going to get her lawyer. She told me to wait here. She left me here. I knew exactly what Victoria was doing. A rat never calls a lawyer when the ship is rapidly sinking. The rat finds the nearest, quickest exit. I did not say another word to my family. I turned around and walked straight out the front door, heading for the wooden side gate that led to the dark alley behind our property line. Sure enough, parked in the pitch-black alley, hidden perfectly from the police cruisers out front, was the sleek black Porsche Cayenne. The engine was running, a low, powerful purr in the night. The red taillights glowed ominously. Victoria was frantically throwing heavy designer bags and a metal lockbox into the back seat. I walked up and stood directly behind the vehicle, planting my feet firmly on the asphalt, blocking her exit. Victoria slammed the trunk shut and spun around. When she saw me standing there, her fake, polished plastic smile was completely gone. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure, vicious panic and deep, ugly hatred. "Move out of the way, Julian," she hissed, marching toward the driver's side door, her keys jingling in her shaking hand. "I do not have time for your pathetic family drama tonight." "You are not going anywhere, Victoria," I said, standing my ground, my hands casually resting in my pockets. I had already reached inside my jacket and hit the record button on my phone. "The feds are tearing the house apart right now. They have the ledger from Marcus at the bank. They have the fake LLC documents. They have the fraudulent appraisal forms you forced Aunt Beatrice's title company to process. It is over. You are cornered." She stopped, her hand hovering over the door handle of the Porsche. She let out a sharp, bitter, incredibly arrogant laugh. All the polished elegance vanished, revealing the street-level, desperate grifter she truly was. "You think you are so smart, do you not?" she sneered, stepping closer to me, trying to intimidate me with her sheer audacity. "You think you are the big hero sweeping in to save the day? Your family is a joke, Julian. They were the easiest, most pathetic marks I have ever played in my entire career. Your father was so desperate to feel like a big shot, so desperate to pretend he had wealth, he practically begged me to take his retirement money. And your idiot brother? I could have told Cameron I was selling prime real estate on Mars, and he would have signed the deed with a smile. I took the money because they handed it to me on a silver platter. You used my parents' house as collateral for a shadow loan from a predatory lender," I stated clearly, ensuring the hidden microphone picked up every single syllable. "You forged my mother's signature on the second mortgage documents." "Prove it," she snapped, her eyes narrowing with absolute malice. "I have offshore accounts your little federal friends will never, ever find. By the time they untangle the mountain of paperwork I left behind, I will be sitting on a beach with a brand new passport and a new name. Your family deserves everything they are getting. They tossed you out like literal garbage the second I flashed a little cash and bought them some cheap imported scotch. They are greedy, pathetic, hollow fools, and I just gave them exactly the disaster they asked for." I looked at her, feeling a strange sense of absolute calm. I did not yell. I did not threaten her with physical violence. I just stared at her with absolute, unwavering pity. "You really think you are the smartest person in the room?" I said quietly. Before she could spit out another insult, the dark alley suddenly lit up with blinding white headlights. Two unmarked federal SUVs, completely blacked out, pulled into the narrow space from opposite ends, blocking the Porsche from the front and the rear. There was nowhere to run. The heavy doors flew open, and 6 armed federal agents poured out, their weapons drawn and leveled directly at her. "Victoria Cole, step away from the vehicle and keep your hands exactly where we can see them," a voice boomed over a heavy loudspeaker, echoing against the brick walls of the alley. Victoria froze, the color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking like a ghost. The keys dropped from her hand, clattering loudly against the cold asphalt. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a sudden, horrifying realization. "You called them," she whispered, her voice trembling for the very first time since I met her. "Actually," Captain Lawson said, walking up from behind me with a pair of heavy, gleaming steel handcuffs. "Julian called us 3 days ago. He delivered the entire case on a silver platter. Turn around and put your hands behind your back. You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, bank fraud, and money laundering." I stepped back, crossing my arms, and watched as they slammed Victoria against the side of her expensive luxury car. They cuffed her tightly, read her Miranda rights, and shoved her unceremoniously into the back of an SUV. The arrogant mastermind who had destroyed my family, who had treated me like a peasant, was reduced to a terrified criminal in the back of a police car. I turned around and walked back into the house. The initial strike of the storm had hit, but the real destruction, the absolute fallout for my family, was just beginning. The living room was terrifyingly, suffocatingly quiet after the federal agents finally packed up and left. They took dozens of boxes of evidence, hard drives, and financial records, leaving behind nothing but a stack of official seizure notices on the coffee table. The flashing red and blue lights faded down the street, leaving the house in a cold, dim, oppressive stillness. My father was still sitting in his armchair, frozen in place. He looked at the paperwork left on the coffee table as if it were written in an alien language. The shadow lender, the aggressive private equity firm Victoria had used to extract the equity, had already been notified by the feds and had filed a default notice. The house was going into immediate, aggressive foreclosure. Cameron was sitting on the floor, his head buried in his hands, rocking back and forth like a small, frightened child. "I am going to jail," he kept muttering, his voice hollow. "I am going to federal prison. They are going to lock me up." Sylvia, wiping her running mascara with the back of her trembling hand, walked over to me. She reached out and grabbed my hand, squeezing it so tightly her knuckles turned white. Suddenly, the dynamic shifted. Suddenly, I was no longer the placeholder, the ATM, the annoying obstacle. Suddenly, I was their only son again. "Julian," my mother pleaded, her voice thick with absolute desperation and fear. "We have absolutely nothing left. The bank accounts are frozen by the government. The retirement is completely gone. The house is being taken from us. You have to help us. You have that great salary from your engineering firm. You have your savings. You have a college fund you started for your future. You can hire a massive, expensive legal team for Cameron. You can pay off the shadow lender and save the house before they kick us out. We are family, Julian. We need you now more than ever." Richard looked up from his chair. The stubborn pride, the arrogant superiority that had defined our relationship for decades, was entirely gone from his eyes, replaced by a pathetic, begging hunger. "Son," he said, using that word for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. "I was wrong. I was blinded by her. I admit it. I made a terrible mistake. Please, Julian. You are the only one who can fix this mess. You always fix things around here." I stood there in the center of the ruined living room. I looked at the three of them. I looked at the walls I had painstakingly painted with my own two hands on my weekends off. I looked at the ceiling where I had paid Toby, the contractor, thousands of dollars to fix the severe water damage. I felt the massive, crushing weight of 5 years of sacrifice, 5 years of brutal financial abuse, 5 years of being treated like a second-class citizen in my own home. I slowly, deliberately pulled my hand out of my mother's desperate grasp. I reached inside my heavy jacket pocket and pulled out a thick, legal manila folder. I tossed it onto the coffee table, letting it land right on top of the federal foreclosure notice. "I am not fixing anything," I said, my voice echoing in the quiet room like a heavy wooden gavel striking a judge's bench. Richard stared at the folder, confusion washing over his exhausted face. "What is this?" "That is my exit strategy," I replied coldly, staring him down. "When you sat at that dining table and told me to take the guest room or move out, when you laughed in my face and told me I was completely useless, you made a critical, fatal error. You forgot that I am an engineer. I document absolutely everything. And you forgot that my best friend, Harrison, is the most ruthless, brilliant real estate lawyer in the entire state of Nebraska." I pointed a firm finger at the documents inside the folder. 3 days ago, I sat down in a conference room with Harrison and Captain Lawson. I handed over the bank ledgers I forced Marcus to print. I handed over the Shell LLC filings. But more importantly, I handed over every single receipt, every single contractor invoice, and every single bank transfer I made to keep this house standing over the last 5 years. Cameron looked up from the floor, wiping his nose, completely lost. "What are you talking about? What does that mean?" "I filed a mechanic's lien and a constructive trust against this property," I explained slowly, making sure they understood every single word. I established a legally binding, indisputable paper trail proving that I was the sole financial provider for the maintenance, taxes, and structural integrity of this asset. Harrison took those documents straight to a federal judge. Because Victoria used fraudulent, criminal means to secure the second mortgage, and because my financial contributions predate her criminal involvement by years, the court granted my petition immediately. Sylvia gasped loudly, her hands flying to cover her mouth in shock. "What does that mean for us?" Richard demanded, his voice shaking with a new kind of terror. "It means," I leaned forward, resting my knuckles on the solid wood of the coffee table, locking eyes with my father, "that the federal government has completely seized the house. The shadow lender will take whatever tiny fraction of equity you had left. But my money, the $150,000 I poured into this place to save you from bankruptcy, is legally protected by the federal court. When this property is liquidated at a federal auction next month, the government will cut me a check for my secured interest before the shadow lender or anyone else gets a single dime. My money is safe. My accounts are totally separate from yours. I am completely, legally untouchable." The remaining color completely drained from Richard's face. He finally realized the absolute magnitude of what I had done. I had not just walked away from them. I had built an impenetrable, bulletproof legal fortress around myself, locking them outside in the freezing storm they had created. "You planned this," Cameron whispered, horrified, looking at me like I was a monster. "You knew they were going to take the house, you knew the feds were coming, and you just protected yourself? What about us? What about my legal defense fund? You have the money, Julian. You are getting a check. Your legal defense?" I laughed, a harsh, bitter, echoing sound that filled the room. "You told me I was not essential, Cameron. You told me it was better if I was gone by tomorrow. Well, I am gone. You wanted to be the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company so badly? Congratulations. You got your wish. Now you get to face a multi-million-dollar federal indictment. You can use a public defender. I hear they are free." Richard stood up, his fists clenched tight, his entire body trembling with an explosive mixture of rage and absolute fear. "You are abandoning your own family. We are your flesh and blood. You are going to let your own parents be thrown out onto the street? You are going to let your brother go to federal prison over a mistake. What kind of son does that?" "It was not a mistake," I fired back, my voice finally rising to match his anger, letting out years of suppressed fury. "A mistake is forgetting to pay the water bill. Mortgaging your house to a criminal syndicate is a choice. You chose to drain your 401k. You chose to forge Mom's signature on a legal document. You chose to throw me out of my own home because a con artist bought you a bottle of imported scotch and promised you free money. You made your choices, Dad. I warned you. I begged you to listen. Now you get to live with the exact consequences of your arrogance." I looked at Sylvia. She was weeping uncontrollably, sinking onto the sofa, unable to hold her own weight. "Julian, please. I am your mother. We have nowhere to go. We have no money for food. You can take the guest room at a cheap motel," I said, repeating my father's exact, cruel words back to him without a shred of remorse. "Or you can figure it out. But you are not getting another single dollar, another single minute of my time. You lost a son the night you chose greed over loyalty." I turned my back on them and walked purposefully toward the front door. The sound of their sobbing, their begging, and their desperate pleading followed me down the hallway, but I did not stop. I did not turn around. I walked out into the cool night air. For the first time in my entire adult life, I felt completely, utterly free. The heavy, suffocating chain around my neck had finally been broken. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far. You're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. Now, let me tell you what happened when the dust finally settled. because the universe has a very strict way of balancing the scales. The immediate aftermath of that night was exactly as brutal and unforgiving as I had predicted. The federal government moves very slowly during an investigation, but when it finally strikes to collect, it strikes with absolute, uncompromising force. Within 3 weeks, the bank and the federal authorities finalized the foreclosure on the property. My parents were handed a strict, non-negotiable eviction notice. The house, the place I had spent hundreds of hours and thousands of dollars repairing, was officially boarded up and slapped with a bright orange government seizure warning on the front door. They had absolutely nothing. Their bank accounts, including whatever meager checking funds they had left, remained frozen indefinitely as part of the ongoing federal investigation into Victoria's massive money laundering syndicate. I did not attend the eviction. I did not offer to help them pack. I heard through Aunt Beatrice, who called me a few weeks later, that they had to pack whatever cheap clothes and personal items they had left into black plastic garbage bags. They moved into a cramped, miserable, roach-infested one-bedroom rental apartment on the absolute worst side of town. The security deposit and the first month's rent for that terrible apartment were paid by selling my mother's beloved floral china, her wedding ring, and my father's vintage collection of watches to a local pawn shop for a fraction of their worth. 6 months passed. It is truly incredible how much a person's life can change in 6 months when you are no longer carrying the dead weight of a toxic, ungrateful family on your shoulders. I threw myself entirely into my career, without the constant, draining anxiety of my parents' financial disasters hanging over my head, without the fear of coming home to a new unpaid bill. My mind was finally clear. I successfully completed the massive commercial bridge project 2 months ahead of schedule. The structural integrity was flawless, saving the firm millions in potential delays. The CEO of my engineering firm called me into his massive glass office on a Tuesday morning. He did not ask me for money. He did not tell me I was a placeholder or a disappointment. He shook my hand firmly, told me my work on the bridge was absolutely brilliant, and promoted me to senior lead engineer right on the spot. The promotion came with a massive salary increase, lucrative stock options, and a beautiful corner office with a panoramic view of the downtown skyline. I used a portion of my new salary, along with the substantial settlement check I received from the federal liquidation of the house, to buy myself a beautiful, modern condominium in the city. It was quiet. It was peaceful. I bought a brand new, top-of-the-line espresso machine, an even bigger flat-screen TV, and I did not have to worry about anyone unplugging them, breaking them, or demanding I sleep on a couch. Naomi, my mentor who had guided me through the darkest days, came over for a celebration dinner. We drank incredibly good wine, and for the first time in my life I genuinely laughed from the bottom of my stomach. While I was steadily building my future, my family was drowning in the harsh, inescapable reality of their present. The local news covered Victoria's federal trial extensively. It was a media circus. She desperately tried to strike a plea deal, throwing her old associates under the bus, but her hidden offshore accounts were eventually uncovered by forensic accountants. She could not buy her way out. She was sentenced to 12 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary for wire fraud, racketeering, and grand larceny. She lost her real estate license forever. Her beloved Porsche Cayenne, the symbol of her fake empire, was auctioned off by the government to pay restitution. Cameron managed to avoid federal prison, but only by the skin of his teeth. Because he was genuinely too stupid to understand the complex financial documents he was signing, and because Victoria's lawyers threw all the blame on her, his public defender managed to get his charges reduced to criminal negligence and tax evasion. But he was hit with massive, crippling fines and a permanent felony record. The brilliant entrepreneur, the visionary golden child who was supposed to build an empire, was now working the graveyard shift at a local convenience store. He spent his nights wearing a cheap polyester uniform, sweeping dirty floors, and struggling just to pay his monthly probation fees. And my father, Richard, the proud, arrogant patriarch who thought he was too good to appreciate my hard work, was violently forced out of his comfortable retirement. At 68 years old, with a failing back, he had to take a grueling job driving a delivery truck for a massive logistics company. He spent 10 hours a day hauling heavy cardboard boxes up flights of apartment stairs in the freezing cold, his body aching, his immense pride completely shattered. Every single time I went to the grocery store, I was reminded of how quickly fortunes turn. I saw older men like my father, exhausted and broken by the world, and I felt a brief twinge of human pity, but I never, ever felt guilt. Guilt is for people who did not try. Guilt is for people who walked away when they could have helped. I gave them everything I had, I bled for them, and they threw it right back in my face. But there was one final secret, one final, twisting knife of betrayal that I had yet to uncover. And it came in the form of a handwritten letter in my mailbox. It was a rainy, gray Tuesday afternoon when I went down to the lobby of my building to check my mail. Mixed in with the electric bill, some junk mail, and a few clothing catalogs was a slightly crumpled, plain white envelope. I recognized the handwriting immediately, even though the letters were shaky and uneven. It was elegant, cursive writing. It was from my mother, Sylvia. I took the elevator back up to my quiet condominium, walked into my pristine kitchen, made myself a cup of black coffee, and sat at the granite island counter. I stared at the envelope for a long time, listening to the rain hit the large glass windows. Part of me wanted to throw it directly into the trash shredder without opening it. I had moved on. Part of me wondered if it was an apology, a genuine, heartfelt acknowledgement of the absolute hell they had put me through. Curiosity eventually won. I carefully opened the envelope and pulled out the single sheet of cheap, lined notebook paper. It was not an apology. Not a real one, anyway. It was a confession. And it was the most pathetic, revealing thing I have ever read in my entire life. Sylvia started the letter by writing extensively about how hard things were in the tiny, depressing apartment. She complained about the constant noise from the neighbors, the smell of the cheap, stained carpet, and how Richard's back was failing rapidly from his brutal delivery job. She spent a full paragraph playing the victim. But then, in the second half of the letter, she revealed the real, sickening reason she was writing to me. She admitted why she had stayed so completely, infuriatingly silent during that horrible Sunday dinner. She admitted why she had looked the other way when Victoria flaunted her ridiculous, fake wealth, even when I explicitly warned her that something was wrong. "Julian," she wrote, the ink slightly smudged, "I know you think I was just blindly protecting Cameron all those years, but Victoria promised me something very specific. Before she and Cameron moved in, she took me to a very expensive lunch downtown. She told me that once her massive commercial deal closed, she was going to give me $50,000 in cash as a personal gift, just for welcoming her into the family. She showed me glossy pictures of a beautiful little vacation condo in Florida, right on the water. She promised me we could buy it together. I wanted that condo, Julian. I was so incredibly tired of being poor, of worrying about the roof and the plumbing. I stayed quiet at dinner because I wanted the money. I am so sorry. I lost my dream vacation home, and I lost my son. Please, I know you got a massive check from the federal settlement. If you have any money left, can you just help me? Just a little bit? We can't afford groceries this week." I read the paragraph twice to make sure my eyes were not playing tricks on me in the dim light. My mother had not stayed silent out of some misguided, blind maternal love for my brother. She had not been manipulated by a master con artist. She had actively sold me out. She had let her own son be humiliated, degraded, and thrown onto the street like trash, all for the false, greedy promise of a cheap vacation condo in Florida. Her hysterical tears on the night the feds raided the house were not tears of sorrow for her family falling apart. They were not tears of regret for how she treated me. They were tears of selfish grief for her $50,000 that evaporated into thin air. I did not feel angry. I did not feel sad. The last lingering thread of doubt in my mind vanished. I felt an overwhelming, absolute sense of closure. I folded the letter neatly, walked over to the stainless steel trash can, and dropped it in. I did not write back. I did not send a check. I did not call her to scream at her. I picked up my phone, blocked her number, blocked my father's number, and blocked Cameron's number permanently. I completely erased them from my digital and physical life. Setting boundaries is the hardest thing you will ever do in your life, especially when those boundaries have to be built between you and the people who gave you life. Society conditions us from birth to believe that blood is thicker than water. We are taught that family is an unbreakable, sacred bond that requires infinite forgiveness, infinite patience, and infinite sacrifice, no matter how much they hurt you. But that is a toxic lie. Family is not defined by shared DNA or a shared last name. Family is defined by mutual respect. It is defined by loyalty. Family is the people who stand by you when you have absolutely nothing to offer them but your presence. Not the people who only value you for the size of your salary. My biological family viewed me as a utility, a financial tool to be used until it was broken, and then casually discarded when a shinier, more promising tool came along. I had spent my entire 20s and early 30s trying to buy their love. I tried to prove my worth by paying their bills, fixing their mistakes, and carrying their burdens. But you cannot buy love from people who only worship greed. You cannot fix a foundation that is entirely rotten from the inside out. Walking away from them did not make me a bad son. It made me a survivor. I chose to save the only person in that house who was actually worth saving: myself. I built my own life from the ashes of their betrayal. I found my own purpose. My career is thriving, my friendships with people like Naomi and Harrison are real and grounded in respect, and when I lock the door to my home at night, I am the only one holding the key. No one is coming to take my space. No one is coming to demand my hard-earned money. I am Julian, 34 years old. I lost my family, but I finally found my dignity, and I would make the exact same choice again in a heartbeat. Have you ever had to set boundaries with your own family? Have you ever had to walk away from people you loved because they were destroying your peace? It is a painful journey, but it is one that needs to be talked about. Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey.